An online site lists nearly 50 awards that George Martin has won over the years, including multiple Emmys for Game of Thrones. Several years ago, Time magazine named George Martin one of the 100 most influential people in the world. So it truly is an honor in this Medill's centennial year to introduce a master storyteller, my own Medill graduate school classmate from the year of well, George, if it's okay with you, let's just say from a while ago, Dr. George R.R. Martin.
Thank you. Thank you for those kind words, Professor Boyd. And thanks as well to the Dean and the faculty for inviting me to speak today. It's always a pleasure for me to return to Northwestern, something I've done far too seldom since I left Evanston. And after a year in quarantine, it is a thrill just to get out of the house. It has been half a century since my own graduation, but my memories of Northwestern remain fresh. I still recall those words of that song from the WAMU show. How's it go? The football games, the dances, the serious romances, the parties when we didn't get home till dawn. Now, I did attend a lot of football games at Old Dyke Stadium, most of which we lost. I'm not likely to forget that. My father, who loved to gamble on sports, felt a moral obligation to bet on Northwestern every week since his son was a student there. In the end, I think his losses may have added up to more than the cost of my tuition. The dances, though? Sorry, don't dance. I did have a couple of serious romances. Got my heart broken twice on this very campus. Transposed into the future on alien worlds, those relationships form the emotional core of a number of my early stories. Bleed onto the paper, Harlan Ellison once said, and it worked for me. As for the parties where they didn't get home till dawn, alas, I never got my invitations. I do remember my friends and classmates, well, some of them at least. I remember the dorm I lived in, the North Shore Hotel, still standing. I remember my teachers, Ben Baldwin, Peter Jacoby, James Stacy, Neil McNeil, and Bergen Evans, whose class was so popular that he filled Tech Auditorium year after year. I doubt that Professor Evans ever knew my name, but he had a profound effect on my life and my writing all the same. I remember the chess team I captained. We won more often than the football team, but never managed to take down the University of Chicago. As for football, I remember when the student body voted to change the name of the Wildcats to the Purple Haze. Somehow, that didn't stick. My years in Evanston were the years that history has taken to calling the turbulent 60s. There may have been dances and parties, but the protests were more visible. Marches, demonstrations, strikes, rallies, sit-ins, love-ins, all of it reaching a crescendo when the student body rose up against the invasion of Cambodia and the murders at Kent State and tore up the wrought iron fences from one end of campus to the other to erect barricades, transforming Sheridan Road into something akin to the streets of Paris during the French Revolution for about a week. Not long after, I found myself standing with the rest of the class of 1971, where you are standing now, diploma in hand, about to depart Medill and begin what my father called real life. Some of my classmates departed for jobs on newspapers, great and small. Others began careers in radio, television, and film, joined an advertising agency or the staff of a magazine, or found employment with Uncle Sam. Over in Vietnam, the war was still raging, and boys unlucky enough to have had their birth date pulled in the draft lottery found themselves faced with an offer they could not refuse. I got one of those offers myself, but I had been granted conscientious objector status. Had my application been denied? Well, no one knows for certain what lies at the end of roads not taken. But I don't doubt that you can find the names of some of my classmates engraved upon that big black wall in Washington, D.C. I was luckier, doing 2 years alternative service with Vista in Chicago. Nights and weekends, I wrote science fiction. By the end of my service, I had sold a dozen stories and had even been nominated for an award. I lost. I never did end up getting a job reporting the news. Instead, I made a career making up stories about aliens and dragons and vampires. I can almost picture some of my old professors shaking their heads and wondering how I went wrong. A couple of my colleagues, fellow writers of science fiction and fantasy, like to call themselves professional liars. I get the joke, but it's not one I tell myself. Yes, my stories are all about people who never lived, doing things that never happened, in places and times that have never existed. But I like to believe there are truths in them nonetheless, truths about life and love, good and evil, and the human heart in conflict with itself, the only thing worth writing about, according to William Faulkner. But a novelist's truth and a journalist's truth are two different things. And my fictions have certainly done well for me. Winston Churchill once said, "A lie gets halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to get its pants on." Maybe that accounts for it. My lies flew on the wings of dragons. America was bitterly divided when I left Northwestern in 1971. America is bitterly divided today. Many of the issues that sparked protest and dissension in 1971 remain issues today. Racism, we called it civil rights back then. Sexism, in 1971 the term was women's liberation. Income inequality, back then we spoke of poverty. But the biggest issue, the fault line through the center of American society back then, was the war in Vietnam. Unlike today, the fight over Vietnam did not break down on strictly partisan lines. There were hawks on the Democratic side, among them Lyndon Baines Johnson himself. There were doves among the Republicans, men who wanted us out of Vietnam. People could and did change their positions. In the end, that was what the marches and demonstrations and protests were about, changing minds. I was one of those whose minds was changed. I came to Northwestern in 1966 as a patriotic, crew-cut high school kid out of New Jersey, convinced that we had to stop communist aggression, that if we did not fight the Viet Cong in Vietnam in a few years, we would surely be fighting them in the streets of Bayonne or Evanston. It was not any speech or march or protest that began my transformation. It was a class assignment, a paper I had to write about the origins of the war. The deeper I delved into the history of Vietnam and the American involvement there, the more uncomfortable I grew. This was not the story I had been told. The real story did not fit with my vision of America and the ideals I thought she stood for. I did not want to accept it, but I had no choice. The history was too convincing. It was the facts that changed my mind. Facts. A short word, a simple concept. Truth has a grander ring to it, I will admit, but truth is a tricky thing. A lot goes into deciding whatsoever things are true. Given the same facts, even honest, well-meaning, and reasonable men and women may arrive at different conclusions, each finding his own truth. But facts are the foundation on which all truths must rest. unless you get your facts right, you have no hope of arriving at the truth. No doubt, everyone here is familiar with the Medill F. Some of you may have had a closer acquaintance with it than you would care to admit. That term was not in common use back in the 60s, as best I recall. The first time it came to my attention was years after my graduation. I was certainly familiar with the concept, however. No matter how deft your writing, how insightful your analysis, how skillful your interview techniques, if you got the facts wrong, even a single fact, a single small, inconsequential, trivial fact, your story was worthless. Readers who noticed your mistake would lose trust in the whole story. What if the rest of it was wrong too? Readers who missed your error would be misled. Neither outcome is acceptable. Falsehoods are never acceptable in a news story, whether intentional or unintentional. As Mark Twain once said, a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its shoes. And yes, I did get a Medill F myself. Only one, I'm pleased to say, and it did not travel anywhere. It may well be because of that lesson learned long ago at Medill that I am so fearful of where we are today in this country, in this world. I would never have guessed that the United States could ever become more divided than it was in 1971, yet somehow we have achieved that. When I look about today, I cannot help but hear the words of William Butler Yeats. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. There was a time, not so long ago, when journalism was the center of our national life. We all read the same newspapers and magazines. We watched the same television shows. They defined us. They united us. They were as much a part of the United States as baseball, apple pie, and the 4th of July. And we trusted them. When Walter Cronkite would end his nightly broadcast with, "And that's the way it is," the country believed him. Liberal readers might not have liked what they read on the editorial page of the Chicago Tribune. Conservative readers would bristle at the editorials of the New York Times. But the news on the front page was seldom questioned. The news was the news. The facts we got from Cronkite on CBS were the same facts that Chet Huntley and David Brinkley were discussing on NBC. Watergate came along only a few years after my graduation. Nixon resigned in disgrace. Woodward and Bernstein became heroes. And applications rose at every journalism school in the country, including Medill. You don't need me to tell you that those days are gone. Broadcast news has become hopelessly politicized. Network news divisions, once considered a public trust, have been absorbed into the entertainment divisions. Opinions, previously confined to the editorial pages, have crept into news columns and newspapers after newspaper across the nation. The concept of objectivity belongs on the endangered species list. And all of this has eroded the public's faith in the journalists who bring us the news. You, my friends, the class of 2021, will have to bear the brunt of all of this. As Super Chicken was wont to say, you knew the job was dangerous when you took it. Daniel Patrick Moynihan once said, everyone is entitled to his own opinions, but no one is entitled to his own facts. A truth that I fear much of the modern world has lost sight of. When I hear supposedly respectable political figures talking about alternative facts, my blood runs cold. Your opinion may differ from my opinion. Your truth may not be my truth. But facts are facts are facts. Ricky Gervais, in a sort of postscript to Moynihan's famous statement, said, opinions don't affect facts, but facts should affect opinions, and do if you're rational. But are we? John Milton once said, let truth and falsehood grapple. Whoever knew truth to be put to the worse in a free and open encounter. His Areopagitica, one of the oldest and most eloquent defenses of the concept of free speech, was another text I was introduced to here at Medill, one that I have often quoted and taken inspiration from in the decades since. But John Milton never had a Twitter account, and he never met Joseph Goebbels, the brilliant, if twisted, propaganda minister of Nazi Germany. Goebbels did not invent lying, but he certainly perfected it as an instrument of state. If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it, Goebbels said. A lie told once remains a lie, but a lie told 1,000 times becomes the truth. I would like to tell you that Milton was right, that Goebbels was wrong. But then I look about me and I wonder. We seem to be living in the age of the big lie. Tens and thousands of my fellow citizens actually seem to believe that Hillary Clinton ran a cannibal pedophile ring from a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. And millions seem convinced that last year's election was stolen, though there is no shred of evidence to support that. During the course of my career as a science fiction writer and fantasist, I've written stories about ghosts, alien intelligences, faster-than-light starships, vampires, and dragons. Wild, fantastical things, but none half so unlikely as the sinister global conspiracies that a large portion of the population seem to believe are real. Will the future prove John Milton right, or does tomorrow belong to Joseph Goebbels and the big lie? That, I think, may be up to you guys. The profession you're entering is not one greatly esteemed by most of your fellow citizens, alas. Recent polls show that journalists are considered slightly less trustworthy than bankers by most Americans, just a few percentage points ahead of lawyers. Mind you, they still rank higher than used car salesmen and members of Congress, but still. My fellow screenwriters have played a part in that. When was the last time you saw a journalist portrayed favorably in a movie or television show? It's been a long time since Lou Grant. These days, you only see reporters in the obligatory mob scene on the steps of a courthouse, screaming and shoving their microphones at some poor sod while shouting inane questions. Instead, we get more cop shows, lawyer shows, reality shows. A society finds its heroes in its stories. Journalists can be heroes, have been heroes, and I hope will be heroes again. It is a heroic thing, I believe, to find the facts and tell the truth, especially when those truths are unpopular and inconvenient. In recent years, the word gatekeeper has taken on a negative connotation, one that I believe is wholly undeserved. There was a reason why so many of the cities and towns of the ancient and medieval worlds were walled, and it was not to provide picturesque ruins for tourists to stroll upon. The night was dark and full of terrors, and the gatekeepers, the guards, were there to keep them out. Today's social media have given us a world largely without gatekeepers, and the trolls have all come out from under the bridges to bedevil us. Our divisions grow deeper and more rancorous every year. There is so much information, so much misinformation out there, so many falsehoods. And as Edgar Allan Poe once said, a lie travels around the world while the truth is putting her boots on. How can we hope to come together again, to trust? With facts, I say. That is where it all begins. I never wanted a journalist to tell me what to think. I could think for myself. Just give me the facts. Does that sound easy? Far from it. It was never easy, and it grows harder every year. A few years after my own graduation, when I had finally reached a point where I had a little disposable income, I made what was for me an extravagant purchase. I bought a set of the Encyclopedia Britannica. All that knowledge in one place, an essential tool for any writer. The other essential tools being a good dictionary, How to Lie with Statistics, and The Elements of Style by Strunk and White. That encyclopedia served me well for a long, long time. But a while back, observing the dust that had gathered on top of the books, I came to the realization that it had been years since I had last opened a volume. A larger repository of human knowledge had displaced it, the internet. These days, like most of the human race, when I need to know something, I Google. It's so much quicker, so much easier, and there is more information to be found online than in all the encyclopedias ever printed put together. And that would be wonderful if only so much of it was not, well, wrong. Those of you who have been paying attention may have noticed that I have returned 3 times to that quote about a lie traveling halfway around the world while truth is putting on its pants or sneakers or boots. Words that I have variously attributed to Winston Churchill, to Mark Twain, to Edgar Allan Poe. Who actually said that, you may ask? All of the above, perhaps? Try none of the above. The line is most often attributed to Mark Twain, but according to quoteinvestigator.com, it does not turn up in any of his writings, and there is no record of him ever having uttered those words during any of his speeches. Churchill never said it. And Poe? Really? Does that sound like Poe to you? If a lie was traveling around the world in Poe's time, it was traveling by horseback. These days, lies travel at the speed of light, thanks to the internet. That's where I found all of these, what shall we call them, misquotations? You can find them too. They're still there. Just type in a paraphrase of the saying with quote, and it will all pop up with little pictures of whoever is being given credit for saying those words. They're wrong, mind you, but they're still there. And there they will remain for years, for decades, for centuries. 1,000 years to now, if humanity has spread to the stars, some future internet will tell us that Mark Twain once said, "A lie will jump to the Horsehead Nebula while truth is putting on its spacesuit." The internet is forever. Its errors are forever. The internet is the greatest depository of human knowledge in the long, sordid, and glorious history of our race, but it is also home of the big lie and 1,000 little lies, along with millions of innocent mistakes, fumbles, and bumbles. We should do better. We can do better. We have to do better if we ever hope to build a better world. You cannot build on a foundation of mistruths. Will we do better? That, I think, is up to you and all the other young men and women leaving college around the nation and the world. My generation, the class of 1971, had the specter of Vietnam hanging over us as we left campus. Your generation faces a different sort of struggle, a war for truth, for facts, for the soul of a nation. In the words of another of my heroes, Stan Lee, with great power comes great responsibility. Good luck to all of you.